On May 24th, 2022, a convicted murderer was sitting down to his first in-prison interview with Le Iene, a fiercely popular Italian television show mixing comedy, satire, and investigation. Among the highly skeptical Italians, the reporters of Le Iene managed to retain a level of confidence across a divided country and have been doing so since 1997. Would this man, sent to prison for 16 years for brutally murdering his girlfriend, would he be able to convince Italy that he is innocent? That he was sent to jail due to overwhelming errors made by investigators and by the judicial system? He was condemned by the media almost immediately following his emergency services call 15 years ago in 2007. His first two court appearances resulted in acquittals until he was finally convicted in 2015. A quiet economics major, no criminal record, nothing to speak of in his past, graduated from Bocconi, the top business school in Italy, coming from a nice family, with a great life and an even better future. Could this be the same man, now in his late 30s, one of the most hated men in Italy, and one half of one of the most infamous Italian crimes from the past 2 decades? His name is Alberto Stasi. On August 13th, 2007, Chiara Poggi, 26 years old, was found dead in her Garlasco family home after being hit several times on the head with a blunt object before being thrown down the stairs. Alberto Stasi, Chiara's boyfriend and discoverer of the body, is the only one under investigation. This crime is known across Italy as il delitto di Garlasco. Hello and benvenuti to Italian True Crime. Today's story takes place surprisingly during the quietest time of the year in Italy, August. Nothing is supposed to happen in August. Italians happily are taking their 1 month of vacation, sometimes abroad, but often they stay closer to home at a seaside resort or a mountain town. At the seaside, they get their share of vitamin D and iodio. Iodio is simply iodine, which is found naturally in the sea breezes and is considered the reason that people who live near the sea show higher levels of happiness, less anxiety and stress. In the mountains, there is the best air quality in Italy, especially for people that live mainly in the polluted cities. Apart from the sea and the mountains, the rest of Italy traditionally closes for August, and a place like Garlasco would be mostly empty. Garlasco is a small town like so many others in the Italian center-north, about halfway between Milan and Pavia. It's a beautiful place, like everywhere in Italy. About 9,000 people, a few restaurants. This is a town hot and full of mosquitoes in the summer and cold and humid through the winter. Its inhabitants go to Milan or Pavia for work. There is not much work in Garlasco. Before 2007, Garlasco was mainly known for 2 things. Its sacred site of the Sanctuary of the Madonna of Bozzola is an important stop on the pilgrimage from anywhere in Europe to Rome. And from the 1960s to the 1990s, Garlasco was well known as the Las Vegas of Lombardia. Young people drove from around North Italy to dance at big nightclubs and discotheques. Since the 90s, people have started going elsewhere, and the town was quiet for a few years. That is until 2007, August, when nothing was supposed to happen. Chiara Poggi was born on March 31st, 1981, in a town called Vigevano, about 10 miles from Garlasco, where she would later live with her parents. She was a driven young girl, very smart, and at 26 years old, she had already graduated with a degree in economics and was employed as an accountant. The school system is longer in Italy than in most European or North American countries. There are 5 years of high school instead of 4, and a minimum of 5 years of university, back in the early 2000s. Many students take at least 6. To be 26 and already working in a professional capacity is impressive. She was described by friends and family as an acqua e sapone beauty. Acqua e sapone refers to someone who does not wear any makeup, or maybe just a little. It literally translates as using only soap and water in the beauty routine. Her pictures are all over the internet, and she has that youthful, fresh-faced glow, but what is most memorable is her smile. Alberto Stasi was born on July 6, 1983, in a more urban area, a metropolitan district of Milan called Sesto San Giovanni. Chiara and Alberto met and started dating in 2005 while they were both economics students in Milan. He was 2 years younger than her, 22 when they met, and 24 at the time of the murder. Alberto eventually graduated in 2008 with top honors. He is easily recognizable by his red hair and is described by those who knew him prior to 2007 as smart, a good student, quiet, and easygoing. Back in 2007, in a town such as Garlasco, being in a 2-year relationship in your mid-20s would bring with it expectations of a serious future together. Times are changing, traditions and norms are very different now in 2023, but back then, Chiara at 26 and already working would probably have expected that her relationship with Alberto was serious and long-lasting. Her grieving mother has sat for interviews and expressed the fact that Chiara was a loyal friend and family member, that she was brought up to be loyal and faithful, and that she would have expected that of her boyfriend Alberto. Also, being in a 2-year relationship in your mid-20s, back in 2007, and in a town such as Garlasco, could easily be a time of real or imagined jealousies. These strong emotions usually stay within the intimate boundaries of a couple, with maybe a few words exchanged with close friends. But in a case of murder, phones and computers are seized and secrets find their way into the public domain, where an entire country can dissect each and every word, gossip with work colleagues, and make all kinds of judgments and opinions. During the summer of 2007, Chiara was working and living with her parents in Via Pascoli, Garlasco, in the province of Pavia. Alberto was off of school for the summer and would be studying in London from July 8th to August 4th. During this month-long period of separation, they exchanged thousands of messages and phone calls. The messages were what you would expect between a young Italian couple that had been together long enough to be comfortable in the mundane, but not long enough to give each other space and privacy. They spoke of logistics and practical matters, like items that Alberto wanted Chiara to bring with her on her upcoming trip to London, or Chiara making suggestions to Alberto regarding restaurants to try or places in London to visit. There are also the usual sentiments, TVTB, to sign off, meaning ti voglio tanto bene, or I love you very much. And there were other more intimate conversations to make outside listeners uncomfortable, when Alberto would talk about wanting to go together to sex shops and special lingerie he had waiting for her. It was often met with less enthusiasm from Chiara's side. She seemed more inclined to organize a weekend trip of good food, shopping, and tourism, enjoying London's sights and experiencing them with her boyfriend. But we can't really know for sure. This is just one small part of years of speculation. There were also messages with little barbs alluding to underlying jealousies, like Chiara reminding Alberto to stay away from the beautiful girls in London, or Alberto's comments about a male colleague at Chiara's workplace. Chiara did go visit Alberto, and from all accounts, they had a nice weekend together. But it was just a short weekend and a whole month apart, and so when Chiara's parents invited her to join them in the mountains near Trento for the August holiday, Chiara politely declined, explaining she preferred to stay in Garlasco. With Alberto planning to return in early August, Chiara and Alberto could spend quality time together. She off work for a bit, and he studying and working on his thesis. Many of their messages were in planning this period. They would be able to practice living together in Chiara's family home while her parents and brother were away. They could make food, wake up together, go to bed together, watch movies, and see what it was like to move on to the next phase of their relationship. Chiara's mother spoke with her daughter frequently, and all seemed to be going well with her and Alberto and their living experiment. There was no red flag, there was no reason to be anything but happy and excited and allow young love to grow. August 12th, 2007 was a Sunday. Chiara's mother had spoken to her at about 7 p.m., and again everything was good and everything was as it should be. Chiara spoke with her aunt after her call with her mother, and again all seemed fine and good and usual. Chiara and Alberto ate pizza that night, watched some TV, apparently Sex and the City. At about 10 p.m., Alberto went to his family home to check on his dogs. It had started to thunder, and he wanted to make sure his dogs were okay. He was gone approximately a half hour. What sometimes happens in a young relationship when one partner leaves their phone or laptop unattended, especially when they've been separated for a long period, and there could be reason to be suspicious. We actually do not know any motives here. There's just conjecture. The facts are that his computer left behind was accessed in that period, and several files and photos were opened, viewed, and downloaded. There were pictures of women's feet all around London, even taken on the weekend Chiara was visiting. There were pictures of women's bodies, which were not Chiara's. There was at least one picture of Alberto looking close to a woman that Chiara did not know. And finally, there was lots and lots of pornography. After checking on his dogs, Alberto returned to Chiara's home, stayed almost 2 more hours, and then left to sleep at his house shortly after midnight, according to his statement. Like most homes in Italy, Chiara's family home had a security system that could alarm the doors and windows when she was inside. If someone came to the door, she would deactivate the alarm using a code, and later close herself again in by inserting the code to activate the system. This is how we know exact times in this case, as the security system has left a record. The system was activated and deactivated 4 times between 11:27 p.m. and 1:52 a.m. This may have been attempts at reconciliation, but it may also have been Chiara letting the family cats in and out. So much of this case circles around what really happened the night before. Most people think she confronted him about his inappropriate pictures and pornography, and they had a fight about this. Alberto says he didn't sleep there that night, though we only have his word for it, as there are no witnesses. Chiara never had a chance to speak with anyone about what happened. Presumably it was too late that same night, and if they did have a fight, maybe she would sleep on it, and things would make more sense in the morning. The next morning was Monday, August 13th. The morning was hot and humid, about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. At 9:12 a.m., the security system was disarmed. Was it Chiara letting someone in? Was it habit? Did the cats need to go out? Did someone need to leave? Again, it was August, no witnesses. We just don't know. Almost 5 hours later, at 1:50 p.m., there is a call to 118, the emergency services number. It is Alberto, and the transcript goes something like this. Yes, I need an ambulance in Via Giovanni Pascolo in Garlasco. In Garlasco? Yes. Via Giovanni Pascolo. What's the address? 29. It's an alley. You'll find it immediately. What? It's an alley. I think it's 29. I'm not sure. What happened? I think a person has been killed, but I'm not sure. Maybe she's alive. What do you mean? What happened? What can you see? Now I'm with the Carabinieri. There's blood everywhere, and she's lying on the floor. Is she outside or inside the house? No, in the house. Okay, and are you related to her? No, she's my girlfriend. How old is she? 26. Are you in the house right now? No, I'm at the police station. The following details of the crime scene are gruesome, so now is a good time to skip ahead about 1 minute if you prefer not to listen. When the police arrive, they find Chiara's body lying on the floor at the bottom of the steep stairs leading down to the basement. The cause of death was determined to be a laceration of the brain contextual to the breaking of the skull. The time of death is never precisely stated, but the autopsy suggests Chiara died between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. Chiara was hit in the head and face 10 to 15 times, only to be thrown down the cellar stairs. The weapon was never found, but experts suggested she may have been hit with a hammer or a pair of bolt cutters. There was a lot of blood, some partially dry, on the steps and drywall. Chiara herself was also covered in blood, her face especially. The police kept Alberto for questioning for 17 hours. He never asked for a lawyer, and he cooperated fully. Despite his cooperation, investigators were immediately suspicious of Alberto. First of all, is his 118 call. It just didn't make sense. Number 1, why didn't he stay with his girlfriend? Instead, he drives to the police station and makes the call on the way. Number 2, on the 118 call, he said a person was killed. It sounded like a stranger. Eventually, when asked, he said it was his girlfriend, but this raised red flags. Number 3, in his initial interview, he said her face was clean and pallid, when it was actually full of blood, leaving the carabinieri to wonder if he had even been there, or having known she was dead, he simply went to the police. Soon there would be other reasons to be suspicious, but for now there just wasn't enough evidence. We know after a murder, police will first look at those closest to the victim, and so Alberto was under a microscope. Apart from the gruesome crime scene, investigators noted that Chiara was still in her pajamas, that breakfast items were still out on the table, that the bed looked slept in and unmade, and that though initially thought a robbery gone wrong, nothing in the apartment looked disturbed or would lead police to go down that path. The murder, if anything, looked like a crime of passion, and other small clues would lead investigators to conclude that Chiara must have known her killer well enough to still be in PJs letting someone into her home. The police, with laser focus, continued to put their efforts into investigating Alberto. What seemed at first to be a small detail, the state of Alberto's shoes, ballooned to such proportions it became impossible to rein in. Alberto had told investigators he went into Chiara's home and found her on the stairs, but his shoes were pristine. There was no trace of blood on them, even though the hallway leading to the basement was extremely messy and covered by bloodstains. The soles of the Lacoste shoes Alberto was wearing when he entered Chiara's house were perfectly clean. Also, he had driven his car to check on Chiara and then drove it to the police station. The car mat insert was also perfectly clean, no trace of blood. The assumption by police is that Alberto never went in the house and that the emergency call was made because he already knew Chiara was dead. This was enough for an initial arrest. Alberto Stasi was arrested on September 24, 2007, but he was released from prison 4 days later when the preliminary investigative judge declared there was insufficient evidence. This was only the beginning of an investigation that would go on for 8 more years, leading finally to a conviction in 2015. Alberto had an alibi, he said, for the period 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., the large window of time this murder could have been committed, according to the autopsy. We have his exact statement. Alberto said, "I had the alarm clock set at 9 as usual, and the second alarm at 9:30. I got up, and at 9:45 I called Chiara's cell phone with no reply. I specified that this call in the morning when we woke up, it was a usual thing between me and Chiara. I didn't worry about the fact that she didn't answer. I remember that between 9:30 and 10, my mother called the landline number and I answered. Our conversation didn't last long. I went on writing my thesis, and at about 10:45, I made another call on Chiara's cell phone, and I didn't get an answer. I continued to write my thesis until about 12:20, when I called Chiara both on her landline and her cell phone." Alberto said he then made a pasta for lunch, and after the pasta he tried calling Chiara again unsuccessfully until he finally decided to make the short drive to her home and see why she wasn't answering. His computer was sequestered, and initially his computer data did not support his statement. It looked like there was no activity between 10 and 12, which would have been a huge coup for police. However, when a deep IT forensics dive was completed, it came out that the police had inadvertently eliminated all Word files saved between 10 and 12. It was a tense moment and must have been very frightening for Alberto, knowing at least in this he was telling the truth. And luckily, in this case, the truth did prevail and his timeline adds up. According to the IT forensics, on the morning of the murder, Alberto Stasi turned on his PC at 9:35 a.m., checked in after a minute, looked at pornographic images until 9:46, and then opened an image editing software at 9:57. At 10:05, he played a pornographic film. 12 minutes later, he opened the thesis on which he worked continuously until 12:20. It is not a perfect alibi, as it does not account for the time before 9:35, nor for the time after 12:20 and prior to finding her. It is a big window, from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., and prior to Alberto's strong alibi, the common thought was it probably occurred somewhere between 10 and 12. The next clue is the mystery of the black bicycle. Two witnesses, yes, finally, they're actual witnesses, saw a woman's black bike leaning against the wall of the Poggi home that morning at about 9:15. One of the two witnesses checked her watch, explaining that she does this frequently, and remembers that it was 9:10 when she saw this bike. She was also adamant about the type of bike, as she said it reminded her of the bike she had as a girl. When we say a woman's bike as opposed to a man's bike, it refers to the style of the frame. A man's bike has the bars straight across, while the woman's bike is at an angle, so that women biking in skirts could maintain their modesty. And this is where the bike story becomes incredibly confusing. Investigators found Alberto to be in possession of a burgundy men's bicycle, so very different sounding than a black woman's bike. However, this bike was confiscated, and biological traces of Chiara were found on the pedals. At the same time, Alberto's family had a black woman's bike, which was also available to him. However, the police did not seize this bike, as they deemed it to be what they called a luxury bike, so different from the more sporty bike seen by the witnesses. And again, here is where the story becomes strange. Experts think the pedals were switched out, that the bike with the DNA actually belonged to a different bike, the type seen by the witnesses. This level of detail in bikes should not come as a surprise. Italians and their bikes have a long and beautiful history together. The thought by the prosecution was that Alberto had heard about the credible bike witnesses and realized this could be a deal breaker. So he got rid of the offending bike, but he switched the pedals? Why would he do that? And they had DNA on them? Alberto explained away the DNA, saying it must have been Chiara's menstrual blood that got on the pedals. This last part being by far the strangest part of the bike mystery, and with that we will move on. During the next 8 years, the police and the prosecution would put together different cases to try Alberto. Among the evidence cited was a photograph of Alberto taken the day of the murder, in which an alleged scratch on his arm is visible. The picture is grainy, and the first investigators who questioned Alberto did not detect any scratches at the time, nor was it recorded in any preliminary report. This alleged scratch is often cited, but has not been useful as evidence for the prosecution. The investigators searched the crime scenes for fingerprints and shoe prints and found the home to be full of both. By the time the head of the Carabinieri arrived to begin the investigation, about 25 people had walked through the crime scene, many of whom had not been wearing gloves nor covered their shoes. One by one, the police had to eliminate shoe prints and fingerprints that belonged to these 25 people and find the relevant evidence. Once they had cleaned up the scene, investigators found Alberto Stasi's right ring fingerprint on the soap dispenser on the bathroom vanity, which identified him as the last subject to handle that dispenser. As no other fingerprints were found in the vicinity, Carabinieri think he washed his hands in the sink after the murder and then cleaned up that area, wiping away any other fingerprints, while finally handling the dispenser to clean it carefully as well, leaving the one fingerprint. As for footprints, investigators found size 42 shoe prints in the home, which they believe belonged to the killer. Alberto was a size 42, so this fits nicely. However, the print was different than any shoe found during a search of Alberto's house. Of course, the hypothesis was that he disposed of the shoes he wore during the murder. For example, Alberto was known to have a pair of red shoes, which he had lived in all summer, according to the many pictures he had, but they were nowhere to be found by police when they searched among his shoe collection. This did seem like a good lead, though Alberto claimed he had left them in London, as after a summer of walking around the city, they were completely ruined. The final bits of forensic evidence found in the crime scene included a strand of light brown hair not belonging to the victim and found in her hand. Over the years, attempts at DNA testing of this hair have been futile, as it is lacking the root. Under and on top of her nails, traces of DNA have been tested and have been found to be male and compatible with Alberto, however, with little certainty. The traces were very degraded, but it looked to forensics that there was evidence of more than one male profile. Either way, this evidence was not found to be useful, as it was deemed that the DNA was not the result of a struggle and could have come from other scenarios having nothing to do with the murder. Alberto was first brought in front of the court of Vigevano, strangely Chiara's birthplace, on December 17, 2009. In this first trial, the prosecutor argued that Alberto committed the crime after 12:20 p.m., after he finished working on his thesis, riding his burgundy bike 10 to 15 minutes to Chiara's house, and killing her soon after arriving, so probably after 12:35 or 12:40, and right before the end of the murder window of 1 p.m. This was the official hypothesis coming from the prosecution. At the time, the Poggi family had hired a family friend to represent them in a civil suit, as they intended to make a claim for compensation against Alberto. This attorney, Gianluigi Tizzoni, developed a reconstruction that seemed more promising. He claimed that Chiara deactivated the house alarm at 9:12 in order to let in her killer, who then fled with the black girl's bike. This would potentially explain why Alberto wasn't seen by anyone, and why the stains of blood were partially dry when the police came to Chiara's house. It's still unclear, though, how Alberto got rid of the bike, the weapon, and the dirty clothes he was wearing during the attack. It's also somewhat strange he started working on his thesis less than an hour after the murder, but not impossible, given the coolness displayed by Alberto in the aftermath. According to Tizzoni's reconstruction, Alberto changed his clothes and shoes and went to Chiara's sometime after 1 p.m., but decided not to go in. And that is the reason why his shoes are clean, and in his witness statement he talks about the pallidness of the victim's face, which Tizzoni believes to be what Alberto saw immediately after he had thrown the lifeless body of Chiara down the cellar stairs. Alberto's defense team attacked the prosecution because the evidence against him was weak and could be easily explained. Alberto's ring fingerprint on the soap dispenser was left there because the young couple had eaten a pizza on the evening of August 12th, and probably, before he started working on his thesis again, Alberto went to wash his hands. The DNA on the pedals of the red bike could be sweat or saliva, but it's not really relevant since witnesses saw a different type of bike at 9:15. Just 3 minutes after Chiara shut off the house alarm, on which the prosecution should focus. The defense experts argued that Alberto's immaculate shoes are compatible with the genuine discovery of the body in virtue of an unconscious avoidance, meaning Alberto was unconsciously avoiding visible stains. And any tiny trace of blood may have been released by the soles through the use of the shoes in the following hours. Alberto's team also pointed the finger at footprints on the crime scene left by a pair of shoes with textured rubber soles, not the Lacoste shoes, although they are the same size, 42. The defense held that Alberto had no reasonable motive to kill Chiara. Phone records show she was well aware of her boyfriend's interest in pornography and feet. The presiding judge sided with the defense in a lack of evidence. The uncertainty about Alberto's guilt was serious, because there were only 2 strong circumstantial pieces against him: his fingerprint on the dispenser and Chiara's DNA on at least one of the red bike pedals. The judge had apparently accepted the defendant's argument about the unconscious avoiding of the bloodstains in the hallway. The proof of Alberto's alibi was solid, while the time windows indicated by both prosecutions' reconstructions were too narrow for the alleged attack. The acquittal was appealed, and Alberto next found himself in the Milan court on December 7th, 2011, this time before a panel of judges. This time the prosecution strove to undermine the problematic nature of the young couple's sex life. The digital forensics team, in the meantime, had found pedophile images and videos on his computer, suggesting that may have precisely been the motive. Chiara fought with her boyfriend on the night of August 12th after realizing her boyfriend's preoccupation with pornography wasn't as harmless as she thought. This was the only new argument, however, otherwise no new evidence was presented in the court. Alberto was again acquitted for not having committed the crime. In the sentencing report, the court states that Chiara's death is an unknowable truth. The parents of the victim, media commentators, and overall many Italians interested in the case criticized the court for having reached the judgment in less than a month. The last hope for the Poggi family would be the Supreme Court. After 2 instances of acquittal, an appeal was made to the Court of Cassation on April 18, 2013, and the court did decide to annul the previous acquittal sentences. The Court of Cassation, also known as the Court of Last Resort, is the highest level court of appeal in procedural matters which is asked to squash a verdict, but then refers the case back to a new court at the previous level. The Cassation, among the reasons for the annulment, ordered DNA tests on the hair found in the victim's hands and on DNA residue under the nails, found and never analyzed. The Supreme Court reiterated that it was, in its opinion, difficult to arrive at a result of acquittal or conviction marked by coherence, credibility, and reasonableness, and therefore impossible to convict or acquit Alberto Stasi, preferring, however, not to confirm the acquittal pending new scientific tests. At the referral appeal process on December 17, 2014, following the elaboration of some inconsistencies in the story, new prosecution angles, and even in the absence of evidence from the new DNA tests, such as the one on the hair, Alberto Stasi was for the first time found guilty and sentenced to 24 years imprisonment. The sentence was later reduced to 16 years thanks to the abbreviated rite. There were subsequent appeals on this verdict as well. However, on December 12, 2015, the Court of Cassation confirmed the final sentence of the Milan Court of Appeal, definitively condemning Alberto Stasi to 16 years in prison. In 2016, Alberto Stasi filed an extraordinary appeal for procedural defect, and his defense team presented a new suspect, Andrea Sempio. Andrea Sempio was a person of interest before Stasi became the main suspect. 19-year-old Andrea was one of the best friends of Chiara's younger brother Marco, and he lived only 250 meters from the Poggi home. He rarely called Marco on his landline, preferring to call the cell phone, so it was strange that there were 3 calls made to the Poggi landline between the 7th and 8th of August, after Marco had already left and was not at home. Andrea justified himself by saying that Marco's house phone number was listed just above the mobile phone in the phone book. Also, according to his statement, he already discovered on August 7th that his friend had left because Chiara answered the phone and gave him that precise information. It remains unexplained why he called Chiara's house again the following day, making a longer phone call, when he already knew that Marco had left. Andrea was interrogated again 10 months later, and this time he curiously provided a well-preserved ticket from a parking lot in Vigevano, which was about 20 kilometers away from Garlasco, dating back to August 13th at 11:18 a.m. Andrea explained that a few days after the murder, the receipt popped up in his car, and since he had already been heard by the investigators, his mom advised him to keep it. She said since there has been a murder, it was better to keep this receipt. Andrea as a suspect was mostly ignored until after Alberto's final conviction, when one of the defense experts on Alberto's team proved that the DNA on top of Chiara's nail was fully compatible with Andrea Sempio. In 2017, the Court of Appeal declared the circumstantial evidence against Andrea to be insubstantial, remarking that Andrea frequently used the home computer of the Poggi, and that both the original autopsy and the defense expert believe it unlikely that the DNA on top of the nails was caused by a struggle. As well, Andrea's shoe size is a 44. The investigation into Andrea was closed March 2, 2017, at which point Andrea sued Alberto for slander. While the appeal was initially described as justified by the Attorney General of Milan, the Court of Appeal rejected Alberto's request. He then filed another extraordinary appeal to the Supreme Court, hoping the rejection would be overturned, but the following year the Supreme Court confirmed the Court of Appeal's decision. Alberto continues to affirm his innocence, and his team continues to file appeals. He is adamant that he had no motive to kill Chiara, that the idea of a fight about pornography or foot pictures has been overblown. He did manage to prove that he never had any pedophile material on his computer, What was found by forensics was just traces of files that were never actually downloaded nor seen by anyone on his computer. His team claims there was police negligence, allowing so many people access to a crime scene, among other errors. Alberto wants investigators to continue looking into Andrea Sempio, or to more fully investigate the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. His last appeal filed was in 2020, and on March 19, 2021, the first penal section of the Supreme Court rejected the request for revision of the murder conviction, as the circumstantial value of other numerous and serious elements against Alberto Stasi persists. The mother of Chiara Poggi spoke with journalists after the sentence hearing in 2015. She said, "Justice has been done finally, the justice we wanted." To the question of whether she was happy for Alberto's conviction, she firmly replied that it must never be forgotten that the tragedy affected two families. Alberto Stasi was sentenced to pay €1 million in civil damages to the Poggi family. Today, Alberto works as a switchboard operator at the Bollate prison, and he earns €1,000 per month. There has been related fallout from this case within the Carabinieri and judicial system. The former head of the Carabinieri, the Maresciallo Francesco Marchetto, who started the investigation on the day of the murder, was accused of perjury because he allegedly lied about the bicycle seen at the scene of the crime, saying that it did not look like the one owned by the Stasi family. He was sentenced to 2.5 years imprisonment for perjury and to a provisional payment of €10,000 in compensation for damages to be paid to Chiara Poggi's family. After 15 years, many Italians feel that the multiple elements of circumstantial evidence integrate and create an overall picture of the guilt of Alberto Stasi beyond any reasonable doubt. There must be enough doubt for Le Iene to grant him an interview and give him such a large platform to try and convince Italy of his innocence. Alas, his cold manner and his strange way of answering the direct question, "Did you kill Chiara?" again turned many against him. The one sure truth comes from the mother of Chiara. It must never be forgotten that the tragedy affected two families. Thank you for listening to Italian True Crime, the English language podcast for Italophiles interested in lesser-known Italian crime and murder stories. This case had many elements which gripped the nation: the beautiful, young, happy couple and the unexpected tragedy. But what really has stayed with me is what the mother has said in interviews since her daughter's death. She is racked with a mother's guilt about letting her daughter stay behind during the August holiday, that if only she had stayed behind too, or insisted her daughter come with the family on vacation, Chiara would still be here today. From the outside, we can see that there was nothing she could have done differently. Her daughter was an adult, and there were no red flags, and the home was safe with a security system. Let's hope the mother can find some peace someday, as she sounds like a wonderful mother in person.